That's right. We have no script. But we're going to be talking about Plato, and today we are going to be talking about Plato's biggest idea.
His biggest idea.
His biggest idea.
And his name means big, right?
Well, his name means broad.
So this is his biggest,
Kinda.
broadest idea.
Yeah, his broadest idea. I would say this idea has had more impact on Western thought than any other philosophical idea.
Man, I am on the edge of my seat here.
Yeah, there's no way I could prove that, of course. You can't run some sort of experiment or measure that.
Hire some.
That's why I pitched.
Hire some Oxford scholars and
Yeah.
some mathematicians. Okay, so his biggest idea is, what is it?
His biggest idea is dualism.
Dualism.
Related to that is the idea of the forms.
Okay.
So those are really part of the same thing. But to me, dualism is a more expansive way of talking about this.
Okay, dualism.
Dualism.
I feel like this is a word maybe we've heard on the podcast before.
Probably. Do you know what dualism is?
I have an idea,
All right, lay it on me.
but you're the expert here. So
It's all right. I get to make fun of you.
dualism is the philosophical concept that there's a distinction between the natural world and the spiritual world. Is that
Yeah, that's not bad.
close?
Yeah, that's not bad.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So it is the idea that reality consists of two fundamentally different realms. And you can label that matter and spirit or different ways. We'll talk about how
Okay.
Plato does that. But that when you look at this reality that we are all in, it is primarily two different things, two different realms, and each with its own individual properties. So what's true of one is not true of the other.
Okay.
So it's not like you and I. We're two different persons, but we operate pretty much the same way, right? We are males. We're of a certain race. We're both humans. So dualism is fundamentally different. So metaphysically, it means something like the very nature of reality has a dual nature to it. There is also a substance dualism, which usually is applied to the human persona, the human person. And that is the idea that humans are made of two different kinds of things, one being mind or spirit and one being body. And those are fundamentally different things that are combined within a human. That's usually what's called substance dualism, that we are made of two different substances. But metaphysical dualism goes beyond that, because I don't think you would label one of those two areas even a substance. It goes deeper.
So is the word bipartite? Am I thinking about that? Is that right?
Yeah, you could call it that.
Okay. And so I got a pop culture illustration of
All
this.
right, lay it on me.
Have you seen Stranger Things?
That's a whole series, right?
It's a whole series, a Netflix series.
I think I saw one.
And there's these kids, I think in Indiana. I think it's based in Indiana. Shout out to the Hoosiers.
That's right.
And one of them ends up getting stuck in this realm called the Upside Down. And it's underneath, but it's a different realm.
Okay.
And so it's kind of the same sort of thing where it just time is different and communication, and it can interact with the normal world, but it is a different dimension, so to speak.
Okay.
If you'd seen it, then maybe we could talk through it a little bit more, but that's kind of what my mind goes to. Where
Sorry, I can't help you out.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
All right. So let's talk about what it's opposed to, and then maybe that'll make this a little bit clearer.
Okay. All right.
The main idea that is the opposite of that, or that's usually opposed to, is called monism or monism. Some people pronounce it differently. I like monism. I don't know why.
Okay.
So monism says everything is of one kind or one substance. So ultimately, everything is one, or there is one kind of thing. It's a little bit ambiguous because the term can mean both. For many in the Eastern tradition, it has the idea everything is literally one thing, and everything that looks like it's different than that is an illusion. But you can also be a monist in a different way. For example, you could be a materialist monist, where you would say the only thing that exists is matter. Now, matter takes all different kinds of forms. It can be energy, it can be individual things, but it's all one kind of thing. And that's a monism, a materialistic monism. And there are also idealistic monism, where everything is idea in the sense of non-physical concepts. So George Berkeley, or Berkeley, some people mispronounce it, he was a bishop, so he was a Christian, but he believed that if God is thinking things in his mind, then the idea of a physical reality with a separate existence is redundancy. It doesn't need to be there. And so it's easier for him at least to think of everything simply being in the mind of God. Things don't have their own physical existence. It's all thoughts.
Is that like the Matrix?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of a simulation, but it's not a computer. It's the mind of God.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's similar to that. So you can be a monist of that kind. You can be a materialistic monist. Everything is matter. And that's often the viewpoint associated with naturalism.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can be an idealistic monist, like the Eastern tradition or like George Berkeley or some others. So that is the opposite point of view.
Okay.
And there is, of course, another point of view, what I call pluralism, the idea that reality consists of a number of different kinds of things. That has not quite been as popular among philosophers and thinkers for a number of reasons, probably because it leaves the relationship between all these different things unaccounted for. It's a little bit more messy, I guess. So usually the conflict is between dualism and monism.
So pluralism, that's interesting. I associate that word with other things.
Right.
But is that a newer philosophy or
No.
who's it associated with?
Well, I think you probably go back at least to the atomists. Remember we talked about the atomists,
Yeah.
Heraclitus and, Democritus. Well, they viewed everything as matter,
Mm-hmm.
but then this matter is in the form of atoms that make individual things. I don't know if you classify them as pluralists in this sense or not,
Okay.
but I think if you just felt like you weren't going to take a stance on whether reality is one or there was a dual layer to it, you'd probably default to that, I guess.
Okay. Gotcha. So we've got monism and we've got dualism, and dualism is Plato's big idea.
It is.
Is it an innovation because before him it was primarily monistic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it is an innovation, not because the people before him would call themselves monists, but before him, the idea of dualism versus monism wasn't really developed. It's when he comes on the scene and develops this big dualistic system that now this whole concept of reality being monistic or dualistic really comes to the fore.
So then people can debate it.
Yeah. And I'm sure people did before in some degree, but the way he develops this whole system, so it wasn't just part of his system, it was the foundation of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Not only his metaphysics, but his epistemology, theory of knowledge, his ethics, all of this is tied in with this dualism.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really the foundation of everything he's trying to do. And it is, I call it the most influential idea or the big idea because it is adopted, this part, the dualism, not everything else Plato taught, almost wholesale and almost universally by Christian theology. Now, not everyone. Like I said, Berkeley, you couldn't call him a dualist, and there are Christians who are materialists in a qualified sense. But for the most part, it fits in with Christian theology being dualistic in a slightly different sense, though.
So they take this concept and they adapt it to fit with the teachings of Jesus.
Yeah, and the teachings of the Old Testament.
Okay, so that was going to be my other question is the Old Testament Hebraic thought dualistic as well? Does that fit pretty neatly into this category?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer to that is a qualified yes. So as I understand the philosophy of the Bible, there is a dualism, but it's a little bit different kind. So the philosophy of Plato, we'll talk about that in a second, but just as a summary, it is a dualism between a realm of spiritual realities or ideal realities, non-physical, and this world of physical things that we experience day to day. Now, the dualism of the Bible is kind of like that, but it's a dualism really between the ultimate creator, God, and the creation, the physical creation that he produces or he creates. So in that sense, there is a dualism because there is an ultimate value and there's a realm that goes beyond what we see, but it's not a dualism between matter and spirit as much as it's between creator and creation. So that creator-creation distinction is really fundamental in biblical thought and in good theology.
I see. So God exists as a different kind of being.
Yes.
In a different realm. that certainly can come into contact with the natural world and does, but isn't bound by the laws of physics like we would be, or bound by human limitations, that kind of thing. Is that right?
Yes. And it's even more radical than that, though. If we can say that God exists, we even have to qualify that. To say that something exists normally means it's part of the furniture of the universe in our conceptual thinking. God doesn't exist that way. He's not part of the universe. He is there, and yet he doesn't exist in the sense of coming into being and occupying a place within the furniture of the universe, as it were. He is the one that produces all that does exist in that sense. So he's more the producer of existence rather than one other being who does exist. So it's a very fundamental gap between the creator and the creation.
I think you were talking in a number of episodes ago about like his non-contingency or something.
Right. He is a necessary being. Everything else are contingent.
Yeah, something like that.
Right. So that's another way of putting it. He exists by himself. He needs nothing outside of himself. That's not true of any of us. We exist only because he has willed it. So that's another very fundamental distinction, right? He doesn't exist because we want him to or chose, but we exist because he chose. And so it applies this idea of lordship, ownership, sovereignty, right. It's really the most fundamental distinction I can think of, most deep distinction I can conceptualize.
Yeah. It's the deepest idea that I'm unable to conceptualize. So,
well, there's that too. I mean, we can't really conceptualize it because we don't experience it. But.
No, I got you. So, okay, so that's maybe philosophy of Christianity or philosophy of the Bible. And you said that fits neatly. Well, it fits into this idea because it is dualistic in thinking.
Right.
So, kind of want to bring us back to Plato.
Okay.
Does he have that distinction between creator and created?
No, not really. And we'll talk about one of the myths he gives for creation. Myth not being a pejorative term here, but just a parable to explain creation.
Okay.
But I don't know if we'll get into that today or not. When I say that it seems to fit well, his dualism fits well with the thought of the Bible and Christian theology, I think let's come back to that.
Okay.
Because as I'm trying to explain, it's not the same type of the dualism, but there is another way in which it fits in well with what the Bible teaches about certain things.
Okay.
But I think we'll better understand that if we talk about what his dualism consists of, and then we'll come back to that.
I'll try not to put the cart before the horse.
No.
Okay, so what does his dualism consist of? Is that a good next question?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about that.
Cool.
I was trying to think of how to illustrate this because I really want this to be something understood. I think the first time I ran into Plato, I'm like, what in the world is he talking about? And I think many people have that experience. So I'm trying to simplify and visualize. So I want you to think of maybe a piece of paper, but better, a large whiteboard. Like we've got one right over here in your office, right? So think of a large whiteboard and then draw a big, fat, thick line horizontally from edge to edge. So you've got a big marker and you write that real thick from edge to edge. All right. So you've just divided the board, right?
Yep.
And then on the left side, going up and down, so make this vertical, the top left there, you would put something like the realm of idea or forms. So that's actually one concept with two different words. Sometimes we're going to talk about ideas, sometimes forms, but we mean pretty much the same thing.
Okay.
Plato's going to mean that. Below that, on the left side, you would write the realm of matter. Okay. So you've got form above or idea, and then you've got matter. We'll come back to that. Take a couple inches to the right. Above the line, you'd write non-physical. So this is the non-physical realm. Below that, you're going to write physical realm. Another space to the right, and above the line, you're going to write eternal. Below the line, temporal, non-eternal, or things that happen within time. Above the line, you'd write unchanging. And below the line, you would write mutable, if you want to be technical, or changeable, changing.
Okay.
Above the line, you would write to the right, you would write soul. And below the line, you would write body. And then, maybe on the far side, Again, going vertically this time in all caps, you might write value or valuable, and then below the line, valueless. All right, so let's explore that a little bit.
Can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this whiteboard, and on the top, we've got this realm, and from the left to right, it goes realm of the form or ideas.
Uh-huh.
And then next to that, it's non-physical, and then it's being, and then it's eternal, and then it's unchanging, and then it's soul, and then it's knowledge, and then it's valuable.
Right. Yeah, actually, I wrote that down, but I forgot to include being. Yes, put being above the line.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and read.
And then underneath, so this is the realm of matter.
Right.
You've got physical as opposed to non-physical. You've got becoming as opposed to being. You've got temporal. You've got changing. You've got body. You've got opinion. And you've got valueless.
Right.
So this actually might be helpful for people to pause and write that down, or rewind it and write it down so you can kind of see, because these are continuation.
Right.
What's the word I'm looking for? They kind of like build on each other. Like,
yeah, they build on each other and they overlap.
There's an overlapping and kind of a progression here. So
progression and an interlacing.
Cool.
That's a nice word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like links. How's that?
Yeah. There you go. All right, so let's talk about these. And let's talk about your wonderful wife, Abby.
Okay.
All right. So I want you...
Keep my wife's name out your mouth. No, I'm just kidding.
That's going to be dated very quickly, that reference.
Yes. Well...
Was that Will Smith?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can cut that one out.
No, we'll leave it.
Okay.
All right, so I want you to picture her appearance in your mind.
Okay.
You see her every day, right? So that shouldn't be hard. Now, I want you to, you don't have to do this, but for the purpose of illustration, I would encourage you to go over to that whiteboard and draw a picture of that image in your mind of her appearance on the whiteboard. Could you do that?
Yes and no.
All right. I mean, you could.
Yeah.
It might not work too well.
It wouldn't look like her.
Right. What if you were a really good artist, though?
It'd look more like her.
It would.
Depending on what kind of artist I am.
That's true. Or to take another medium, as it were, imagine that you had Plato, since we're talking about Plato.
Ah, there it is.
But you've got Plato, the modeling clay, and I encourage you to make figure of her face or her head with the Plato. If you were really skilled, you could probably pull that off, right?
Yeah.
Now, are any of those, though, going to be as valuable and as real as the woman herself?
No.
Why not?
Well, for all kinds of reasons, but, they lack any sort of life.
Okay.
First of all, and the way that they don't even get close to actually what she looks like or acts like,
Yeah.
They're 2-dimensional instead of 3-dimensional.
Right.
Well, Plato wouldn't be, but
right.
a sketch would be. Let's see. Yeah, I don't know. Variety of reasons, but
okay. Yeah, and you're on to the one I'm trying to get at, is that there is a limitation not only of your skill or whoever's making that, but of the material itself, the matter.
Yeah.
So if you're making the bust of her head, the matter's going to be the Play-Doh. If you're drawing it, the matter's going to be your pencil or the marker, whatever you're going to use.
Sure.
So what Plato is arguing is that when you see anything around you with your physical eyes, say you see a horse in a field or a tree, what you're actually looking at is something like if you made a Play-Doh copy of your wife's face or drew it on a board. You're seeing a physical copy of something that is much more real, beautiful, and wonderful than that thing you're looking at. What holds that thing back is the fact that it's made out of matter. Just like that Play-Doh doesn't give you the ability to create a life.
That's an interesting thought.
Right. So that is his theory of the forms, is that there is, within your mind, you've got a form of what she looks like, right? You've got an image, an idea. That's a mental thing. And as far as an idea at least could be, it's fleshed out. It looks just like her. But you're not able to replicate that in physical things because of the very limitations of the physical. What he's arguing is that's true of all reality. The physical things we see here are connected to some idea or form that really exists in an intellectual realm or a non-physical realm. And yet the things here, because they're made out of matter, don't represent those things as well as they ever could. So that's his theory of forms, that everything here that we can touch and experience has some sort of non-physical perfect form or idea that has been combined with matter to create the thing that you see.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's basically the idea of form.
So everything. So the pen or the marker or the book, it's a lesser representation of some perfect form of that in another realm.
Yes.
Kind of that's the kind of idea.
Right. Maybe the easiest way to conceptualize this is to think of a perfect horse and then think of an actual physical horse. Because that physical horse is going to be less than that ideal in certain ways. And certainly it's going to be born, so it's going to be weak, and then it's going to die. The real ideal horse doesn't do that. That's eternal. That's unchanging. It's not going to measure up to any of that because it's a physical thing. Its very nature of physicality limits it, keeps it from the ideal of that form.
Okay. So that makes sense of your initial whiteboard diagram. So I understand the horse that exists in the idea realm or the form realm versus the horse that exists in the matter realm. But the form is non-physical. The matter is physical. The horse in the realm of the forms is being. It's perfect.
Exactly. Being and not becoming.
It's not becoming, meaning growing into something or becoming something else.
But the physical horse is.
The physical horse is. The physical horse is temporal versus the non-physical one's eternal. Changing versus unchanging. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm looking at some of those other ones, soul versus body, or knowledge versus opinion, or value versus valueless. That's kind of
let's talk.
unclear.
Well, soul versus body, that's going to be more distinctly about humans, so we'll come back to that one. But opinion versus knowledge. So again, I talked about how he tied his epistemology, his theory of knowledge into all this. You can only really have knowledge of the form because knowledge implies a degree of certainty and understanding that cannot be attached to physical things here. And that's both because they're changing, but also because of the limitations of human senses. So you cannot have true, full knowledge in Plato's sense of the term of the physical things, only of the forms. You can have opinion about those things.
Does the opinion and value, do those also get into like the idea of ethics, where like you and I could debate whether this horse or this horse is better based on how well they correspond to the horse in the realm of the forms?
Well, it does get into ethics, not quite that way.
Okay.
So his ethics are going to be tied into this idea because what he's going to argue, and this is a little bit more difficult to conceptualize. So the horse illustration is the easiest one. But he's going to argue that there are also ideal forms of justice and goodness and beauty and love and all these things that we should value. So part of the ethics, or really the main part, is learning what those are and then practicing.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. But it's more difficult to conceptualize what does the ideal form of justice look like. But that's also helpful corrected, because if we just had like the horse analogy, we think it was an actual physical horse. But again, it's not, right?
Yeah.
It can't be a physical horse of a certain size, weight, body proportions, or anything like that. That's not the essence of what the perfect horse is necessarily. It's the idea of horseness, as it were.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about the ideal or the form of justice, then you're understanding the forms and ideas working in a little bit deeper way than we would otherwise.
I see. So and I think Aristotle's going to pick up on some of that with his virtues. Am I right? There's going to be the idea that there's a right way to love people, or a right act of justice. And then that's kind of how you want to orient your life around those.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, I think so. Plato does that a bit too.
Okay. So, I got all kinds of questions.
All right. Well, go ahead.
So,
I got all kinds of time.
Does the way that Christian dualism fits into this, related to the fact that maybe some of these ideas or conceptions of perfectness relate to the character of God?
Yes. There's a lot of ways it works itself out. One way, which was very, very important, was that through some of the early Christian theologians, and in particular Augustine, what happens is they affirm this idea of the forms or the ideas But instead of them existing in some sort of separate realm that's just kind of its own thing, they're all in the mind of God. So they become the form or the idea by which God creates physical things. So they're going to baptize it, as it were, Christianize it. And you could argue that works fairly well. There are some problems with it, I think, but that is the move that Christian theology is going to very self-consciously take, is that the forms are in the ideas of God. And then some people actually associate them with angelic beings. That's a little bit more technical. We'll get to that down the road. So that's one of the ways that it influences Christian theology. But a more fundamental way is this. So now you've got two separate realms, right? You've got the realm of the individual horse, so the individual man or woman. They're physical, they're changing, they're embodied, they're temporal, they're becoming. And then you've got this whole separate realm of the idea or the form of all these things. Now, question, which one's more valuable?
The latter.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, that's the perfect version of it.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's the perfect version of it. The physical is derivative and contingent upon that.
Right.
Right. And those things are all going to die and change anyway. So that's what on the right, I put there value versus valueless. That's not a Platonic category or terminology, but that's the way, to me, it works out. And he would argue that philosophy is knowing the forms. True wisdom is knowing the forms.
Okay.
Your value is in understanding the forms and then living that out. The individual things are not as important. Your body is not as important as your soul. And individual things are not as important as the spiritual realm. So you've got that, but even deeper than that, you've got this whole concept then that even apart from God, so just within this world that he makes, or this realm of reality that he makes, you've got a physical and a spiritual realm. You've got a physical and a non-physical realm that are separate. They interact, but they're fundamentally different. And that obviously is where you put God there. You'd put angels there. Many people put heaven there. I don't think the Bible does, but most people, I think, do that in their thoughts.
Ooh, that's a contentious
Yes,
statement.
it is.
Okay.
But so many Christians today, we have inherited this idea that there's this physical realm, but then there's also this spiritual realm apart from this that we can't see but still interacts with us. Now, that is, I think, a very fundamental thing that has been maybe hinted at or agrees with the Bible, but it's not taught in the Bible in the same way that Plato teaches it.
So you might be putting your finger on one of those areas where it's like, okay, there's certainly some confluence here between these two streams, but whether that's a good thing or whether that's a pollution, we gotta keep talking about.
Yeah, we will. And we can have, people will have different opinions on that, but it's real.
Yeah.
And unless we understand, I think, a little bit of what's going on with Plato, we can't even have that discussion of whether it's good or bad.
This seems really, really key. And especially the idea that what is physical and temporal and changing and becoming and all that stuff might be minimized.
Yes.
Because it's not in the theory of the forms.
Right.
That's also key. So, well, I guess the question, my question is kind of like, what's the interaction between the realm of the forms? Like, is there overlap? But we kind of talked about it a little bit. I mean,
Well, you're getting to the $1 million question.
Okay.
And this is one that dualism has to answer. It's the big question that dualism can struggle with and has to be an answer to, is how one realm interacts with the other. How does the realm of the forms influence, interact with, or change the world of what we experience around us, our physical life? And Plato gives a different answer, I think, than Christian theology does. And then Aristotle is going to give a little bit different answer as well. But that is a very good question.
Yeah. Are we going to piece that one out here and now, or are we going to wait for a future episode?
Probably in a future episode, talk about his myth of creation. So we'll talk about that in the next episode.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. That's it for now.
Thanks.
My pleasure. See you.
See ya.